The stars had been quiet for months across the Zephyrian Coalition's monitoring networks. Commander Veltar adjusted his position at the central console, his glowing skin patches pulsing in a steady rhythm that indicated calm concentration. The massive space station drifted silently through the void, its sensors reaching out across hundreds of light-years to listen for any signs of trouble in their sector of the galaxy. That peaceful routine shattered when the emergency transmission burst through their communications array like a scream in the darkness. The signal was weak, distorted by the incredible distance it had traveled, but the desperation in the alien voices was unmistakable. Veltar's bioluminescent patches immediately dimmed to a worried purple as the universal translators struggled to process the rapid, panicked speech coming through the speakers. "This is Elder Council of Thylara Prime," the voice crackled with static and fear. "We are under siege by the Devourer swarm. Our orbital defense platforms have fallen. Ground installations are failing. 3 billion civilians trapped planetside. The creatures are consuming everything in their path." Veltar's tentacles moved quickly across his control panel, trying to boost the signal strength and get a clearer picture of what was happening. The readings that came back made his stomach sink. The entire Kepler 442 system was lit up with energy signatures that could only mean one thing: the Devourers had found another world to strip bare. The transmission continued, growing more desperate with each word. "We have maybe days before total planetary consumption. Our military forces are scattered or destroyed. Civilian evacuation ships are being hunted down as they try to escape. If anyone out there can hear this message, we are begging for immediate assistance. We will share our technological databases, our star charts, anything you want in exchange for help." Within minutes, the emergency alert had reached every corner of Coalition space. The High Council members began materializing as holographic projections. In their grand chamber, their crystalline bodies catching the light as they appeared one by one. These were beings who had spent centuries perfecting the art of peaceful negotiation, of finding diplomatic solutions to every crisis. "Council leader." Zixana called the session to order with a melodic tone that usually brought calm to any situation. But today, even her soothing voice couldn't hide the gravity of what they faced. The Devourers were unlike any enemy the galaxy had seen before. They weren't interested in territory or resources in any conventional sense. They simply consumed everything organic they encountered, leaving dead worlds in their wake. The debate that followed was exactly what anyone familiar with the Coalition would expect. Subcommittee formations, protocol reviews, diplomatic channels to explore. Some council members suggested reaching out to the Devourer hive mind to attempt negotiations. Others wanted to form a fact-finding mission to assess the situation before committing to any action. A few radical voices even proposed sanctions against the Devourers, as if economic pressure could stop a species that didn't use currency. Days turned into a full week of discussions. The Thylaron distress calls continued to arrive, but each one was weaker than the last. The alien voices that had once been strong and clear now sounded exhausted, defeated. Reports came in of evacuation ships being destroyed, of major cities falling to the advancing swarm, of refugee camps being overrun. Meanwhile, far from the Coalition's pristine council chambers, the desperate Thylaran communications officers had made a decision that would change everything. If the civilized species of the galaxy couldn't help them in time, maybe the uncivilized ones could. They began broadcasting their distress call on every frequency they could access, including the restricted channels that most species avoided at all costs. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was halfway through his third cup of coffee during the night shift at Luna Station when the signal broke through the usual background noise of deep space. The young communications officer had been monitoring the cosmic radio chatter for 2 years, mostly listening to automated beacon signals and routine military transmissions. He'd never heard anything like the raw terror that suddenly filled his headphones. The universal translator kicked in after a few seconds, turning the alien speech into words he could understand. But honestly, Jake thought, as he sat bolt upright in his chair, he didn't need a translator to recognize the sound of people dying. "Commander Peterson," Jake called out, his voice tight with urgency. "You really need to hear this transmission, right now." The emergency alert reached Earth's Defense Command at 0347 hours local time, waking Admiral Rebecca Davis from the first decent sleep she'd had in weeks. By the time she reached the Situation Room 6 hours later, the entire building was buzzing, with activity that reminded her of an anthill someone had just kicked over. Davis had earned her nickname Hawk during the asteroid mining conflicts, where her ability to spot threats from impossible distances had saved countless lives. Now, standing before the massive holographic display showing the Kepler 442 system, those same instincts were screaming at her. That time was running out faster than anyone realized. The three-dimensional star map painted a horrifying picture. What had once been a peaceful solar system with 7 inhabited worlds was now a graveyard. The outer planets showed no life signs at all, their surfaces stripped down to bedrock. The inner worlds were partially consumed, with massive organic signatures indicating the devourer swarm was working its way inward, like a cancer eating through healthy tissue. "The latest intelligence suggests we have maybe 48 hours before the primary planet is completely stripped," Davis announced to the emergency council session. Her voice carried the kind of authority that comes from decades of making life or death decisions in the depths of space. While other galactic civilizations are still forming committees and drafting proposals, 3 billion innocent people are fighting for their lives. The reaction was exactly what she'd expected. Defense Secretary Williams immediately launched into a lecture about proper first contact protocols. Senator Rodriguez demanded to know what legal authority they had to intervene in alien affairs. General Hayes questioned whether humanity even had the military capability to take on a threat that had already defeated an advanced spacefaring civilization. "We don't have time for this bureaucratic nonsense," Davis snapped, her patience finally breaking. "Every minute we waste in debate is another 1,000 lives lost. These Thylorans didn't attack anyone. They're not trying to invade Earth or steal our resources. They're just dying, and they asked for help." President Torres, who had been listening silently from the head of the table, finally raised his hand. The room fell quiet immediately. The man had a reputation for being slow to anger, but decisive when action was needed, and everyone present recognized the look in his eyes. "Admiral Davis," Torres said quietly, "forget the protocols, forget the politics. What do you need to save those people?" "Everything we have," Davis replied without hesitation. "And probably some things we don't have yet." What happened next would go down in military history as either the most brilliant mobilization ever attempted or the most reckless gamble humanity had ever taken. Within 30 minutes, every military installation on Earth and throughout the solar system received the same message. All available ships were to report for immediate deployment. No exceptions, no delays, no questions asked. The response was unlike anything anyone had seen before. The massive orbital shipyards around Mars began working around the clock to retrofit civilian vessels for combat duty. Mining ships that had spent decades hauling asteroids suddenly found themselves equipped with military-grade weapons systems, jury-rigged by engineers working on pure adrenaline and determination. Research vessels designed for peaceful exploration had defensive arrays welded to their hulls by crews who barely understood what they were installing. But perhaps most surprising was the civilian response. Word of the alien distress call had leaked through military channels, and within hours, volunteer ships were arriving at the staging areas. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, even private yachts showed up with their hulls reinforced and their holds packed with medical supplies, food, and emergency equipment. Captain Lisa Wright found herself in command of one of these civilian auxiliaries, a converted freight hauler called the New Horizon, that had been hauling grain between Earth and the outer colonies just days before. Her crew was a mix of volunteer doctors, off-duty engineers, and ordinary citizens who had simply decided they couldn't sit by while genocide happened somewhere in the galaxy. "I need everyone to understand something," Wright told her assembled crew as they prepared for departure. "We're not trained soldiers. Most of us have never seen combat, and we're heading toward a fight against aliens we don't understand, using weapons we barely know how to operate." She paused, looking around at the faces of the 63 volunteers who had signed up for what might very well be a suicide mission. "But we're human beings," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "And when someone calls for help, we answer. That has to count for something." 18 hours after the first distress call reached Earth, the largest human fleet in history launched toward Kepler 442, carrying with them the hopes of an entire species and the desperate prayer that they wouldn't arrive too late. The moment the human fleet materialized at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, every person on every ship fell silent. The sight that greeted them was something straight out of humanity's worst nightmares, magnified beyond anything their darkest science fiction had ever imagined. The Thyleran homeworld, which intelligence reports had described as a beautiful blue-green marble covered in floating cities and crystalline spires, was now barely recognizable. Massive, organic ships, each one easily the size of Manhattan, clung to the planet's surface like parasites feeding on a dying host. The vessels pulsed with a sickening rhythm, their bioluminescent surfaces flickering as they methodically stripped away everything that had once been alive and thriving. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Blake stared at his sensor readings aboard the UES Defiance, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to process the numbers. "Admiral, I'm reading 47 primary devourer vessels, each measuring between 15 and 20 kilometers in length. Secondary support organisms number in the thousands. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases." From the observation deck of the flagship, Admiral Davis watched as one of the alien ships detached a feeding tendril that stretched down from orbit like a grotesque umbilical cord. Where it touched the planet's surface, everything simply disappeared, consumed and converted into more biomass for the growing swarm. She'd seen battlefields before, witnessed the aftermath of orbital bombardments and fleet engagements, but this was something entirely different. This was systematic annihilation. "They're not just killing the planet," whispered communications Officer Kelly Martinez, her voice barely audible over the bridge's electronic humming. "They're eating it alive." The Devourer ships had clearly detected the human fleet's arrival. Several of the massive organisms began turning toward them, their surfaces rippling with what could only be interpreted as anticipation. These creatures had evolved over millions of years to fight the advanced civilizations of the galaxy. They expected energy shields that could be adapted to and overcome. They anticipated plasma weapons and particle beams that followed predictable patterns. Their bioarmor had been specifically designed to absorb and redirect the sophisticated attacks of species that had long ago moved beyond primitive kinetic weapons. Admiral Davis studied the tactical display, watching as the alien ships began forming what appeared to be a defensive formation. She'd spent her entire career studying military history, from ancient Earth battles to modern space combat doctrine. Right now, looking at these impossibly large creatures that seemed to move with purpose and intelligence, she found herself thinking about something her grandfather had told her years ago, about fighting dirty when your life was on the line. "All ships, this is Admiral Davis," she announced over the fleet-wide communication channel. Her voice carried across hundreds of vessels, reaching everyone from seasoned military officers to volunteer civilians who had never fired a shot in anger. "I want everyone to listen carefully. These devourer things have been conquering civilizations for who knows how long. They've adapted to fight advanced species with advanced weapons and advanced tactics." She paused, watching as the enemy formation continued to adjust, clearly preparing for the kind of sophisticated space battle they'd fought countless times before. Lucky for us, Davis continued, and those who knew her well could hear the dangerous edge creeping into her voice, we're still partially barbarians. These things have never fought humans before, and they have no idea what we're capable of when we're angry. All ships, weapons free. Show them what happens when you mess with Deathworlders. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded galactic history. Instead of the elegant energy exchanges and tactical maneuvering that characterized warfare between advanced civilizations, the human fleet attacked like a pack of wolves that had cornered something much larger than themselves. Captain Tom Rodriguez, aboard the heavy cruiser Wolverine, opened fire with weapons that made the Devourer ships recoil in what might have been surprise. His railguns hurled solid metal slugs at incredible velocities, punching through bioarmor that had been designed to deflect energy beams. The kinetic projectiles tore massive holes in the organic hulls, causing alien ichor to spray into the vacuum of space. Commander Emily Watson led a squadron of converted mining ships that released clouds of explosive drones originally designed for asteroid demolition. The small devices attached themselves to enemy hulls, like mechanical parasites, before detonating, creating chain reactions that rippled across the bioship's surfaces, where galactic civilizations might have used sophisticated guided missiles. The humans simply threw everything they had, and let chaos sort out the results. But perhaps most shocking of all was the boarding action, led by Marine Colonel James Parker. While other species had abandoned close-quarters combat centuries ago, Parker's Marines launched themselves directly at the alien vessels in armored pods, carrying weapons that hadn't changed much since humanity first left Earth. Flamethrowers designed for clearing vegetation burned through organic corridors. Chainsaws meant for cutting trees carved through bioarmor plating. Mining equipment repurposed for war created havoc in the aliens' carefully organized internal structures. The Devourer hive mind, which had successfully conquered hundreds of worlds by adapting to predictable patterns of advanced warfare, suddenly found itself facing something it had never encountered before. Creative, unpredictable, absolutely insane tactical thinking backed by weapons that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. For the first time in their species' existence, the Devourers discovered what it felt like to be confused. The space battle raged above, while something equally important was happening on the planet's surface. As human warships tore into the Devourer fleet with their chaotic mix of weapons, transport ships began breaking through the alien blockade to reach the dying world below. What they found when they landed was worse than anyone had imagined. Captain Lisa Wright had seen disaster zones before, during her years flying relief missions to mining colonies, but nothing had prepared her for this. The converted freighter New Horizon touched down in what had once been the capital city of the Thylaran homeworld. Now it looked like something from humanity's worst apocalypse movies, except this was real, and the stakes were measured in billions of lives. The Thylaran buildings, which had been grown rather than constructed, were collapsing as the organic material that supported them was consumed by advancing tendrils of alien biomass. Survivors huddled in whatever structures remained intact, their large eyes wide with terror as they watched their world literally being eaten around them. Medical teams, move out, Wright ordered as her ship's cargo bay doors opened. Remember, we don't know anything about their biology, but pain and fear look the same on any face. Help where you can. Dr. Amanda Foster led the first medical team into the ruins, her emergency bag slung over her shoulder and a portable translator device clipped to her uniform. The Thylarans they encountered were unlike anything in human experience. Tall, graceful beings with skin that shifted color based on their emotions, currently showing the deep purple hues that apparently indicated extreme distress. But what struck Foster most wasn't how alien they looked. It was how familiar their suffering appeared. A Thylaran mother clutching her injured child looked exactly like every human mother in the same situation. The grief was universal, transcending species barriers in a way that made Foster's chest tighten with determination. Meanwhile, Chief Warrant Officer David Kim was dealing with a more technical crisis. The Thylaran life support systems were failing as the devourer biomass infiltrated their power distribution networks. These weren't human-designed systems that he could easily understand and repair. They were grown, not built, using principles that human engineering had never encountered. "Sir, I have no idea how any of this works," admitted Specialist Tyler Johnson, staring at what appeared to be a living computer terminal that pulsed with its own heartbeat. "Then we make it work anyway," Kim replied, pulling out a roll of duct tape and a plasma cutter. "When in doubt, apply human engineering principles until something happens." What followed was perhaps the most bizarre repair job in galactic history, as human engineers used brute force solutions to fix elegant alien technology. They bypassed failing organic circuits with copper wire. They patched leaking atmosphere containment with whatever materials they could find. It shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did, buying precious time for the evacuation efforts. The real turning point came when Corporal Ashley Brooks reported from the front lines of the rescue operation. Her voice crackled through the communication system, barely audible over the sound of weapons fire and collapsing structures. "Captain Wright, we've got a major problem down here. 2,000 Thylarans are trapped in what looks like an underground shelter, but the devourer biomass is advancing on their position. The organic matter is maybe 30 minutes from breaking through their defenses." Major Jennifer Walsh, who had been coordinating the ground rescue teams, didn't hesitate for even a second. "Then we go through it," she declared, grabbing her and signaling her Marines to follow. "No alien space monster is going to eat innocent people on my watch." What the Thylarans witnessed over the next hour changed their entire understanding of what it meant to be a sentient species. They watched as human Marines walked directly into writhing masses of hostile alien biomatter, using nothing but modified mining equipment and sheer determination to carve rescue corridors through living nightmares. These weren't soldiers fighting for their own people or their own planets. These weren't warriors motivated by revenge or conquest. These were complete strangers who had traveled across the galaxy for the simple reason that someone had asked for help. The moment that would be remembered in galactic history books for centuries happened when Private First Class Robert Martinez found a group of Thylaran children hiding in the wreckage of their school. The kids were starving, having been trapped for days without food, and Martinez didn't hesitate to share his emergency rations with them. It didn't matter that he had no idea whether human food was safe for alien digestive systems. It didn't matter that he might need those supplies for himself during the long journey home. All that mattered was that children were hungry, and he had food. The Thylaran youngsters, their skin flickering between fear purple and gratitude gold, accepted the strange alien meals with wonder. Around the galaxy, other civilizations, monitoring the situation, watched in amazement as they witnessed something that had never been recorded in galactic history. One species risking everything for another with no expectation of reward. Above the planet, the devourer hive mind was experiencing something it had never felt before: confusion, followed by something that might have been fear. These humans fought with tactics that made no logical sense. They threw themselves into hopeless situations not because they expected to win, but because it was the right thing to do, for a species that had evolved to consume and conquer. The concept of selfless sacrifice was incomprehensible. The hive mind began issuing retreat commands, pulling back from a battle it could have won, simply because it couldn't understand an enemy willing to die for strangers. The tide had turned, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through something the galaxy had forgotten existed: simple human decency amplified by impossible courage. The morning sun rose over what remained of the Thylaran capital, casting long shadows through the skeletal remains of buildings that had once housed millions of people. The air still carried the acrid smell of burned biomass from the Devourer ships, but for the first time in weeks, it also carried something else, the sound of reconstruction beginning. Admiral Davis walked carefully through the rubble-strewn streets, her military boots crunching on fragments of the crystalline architecture that had made this city famous throughout the galaxy. 3 days had passed since the last Devourer ship had fled the system, and the scale of destruction was only now becoming clear. Entire districts had been consumed down to bedrock. The elegant spires that had reached toward the sky were gone, replaced by makeshift shelters, cobbled together from salvaged materials and human emergency supplies. Elder Desus moved beside her with the careful grace of someone much older than her apparent years. The Thylaran leader's skin showed the deep blue patterns that indicated profound grief mixed with something the universal translators were having trouble identifying. Her people had survived, but barely, and the civilization they had built over thousands of years was gone. The preliminary casualty reports are still coming in, Davis said quietly, consulting the datapad in her hand. We managed to evacuate approximately 40% of your population to the outer colonies before the worst of the consumption began. The survivors on planet number around 800 million. 800 million, the Isis repeated, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of numbers too large for immediate comprehension. From 3 billion. In less than 2 weeks, our entire species came within hours of extinction. They paused at what had once been the central plaza, where a massive fountain had displayed water sculptures that changed with the seasons. Now human engineers worked alongside Thylaran technicians to install a temporary power distribution center, their voices mixing in a dozen different languages, as they tried to figure out how to make human technology interface with alien systems. The sight that caught Davis's attention, though, was happening in a cleared area near the construction site. Sergeant Maria Lopez had somehow convinced a group of Thylaran children to join her in what appeared to be an impromptu game of hopscotch. The youngsters, their skin flickering with colors that probably indicated confusion mixed with delight, were attempting to copy the sergeant's movements as she demonstrated the ancient human game. Your people saved us, Elder Desus said suddenly, her translator device struggling with concepts that apparently had no direct equivalent in galactic diplomatic language. But I find myself unable to understand why. We are complete strangers to your species. We had never even heard of Earth before your ships arrived. We have no resources to offer in trade, no territory you could claim, no strategic advantage that would benefit your civilization. Davis watched as one of the Thylaran children successfully completed a hopscotch sequence, triggering what sounded like delighted laughter from the others. The sound echoed off the broken buildings around them, a note of pure joy in the midst of devastation that somehow made everything seem less hopeless. Because someone needed help, Davis answered simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the galaxy. Thousands of light years away. The emergency session of the Zephyrian Coalition had been running continuously for 5 days. The council chamber, usually a place of dignified debate and careful deliberation, buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of species tried to process what had happened in the Kepler 442 system. Commander Veltar stood at the central podium, his bioluminescent patches cycling through colors that indicated deep thought mixed with something approaching embarrassment. The after-action reports from the human intervention were spread across holographic displays around the chamber, and the numbers told a story that challenged everything the Coalition thought it knew about galactic civilization. The humans deployed their entire available fleet within 18 hours of receiving the distress call, Veltar reported to the assembled delegates. They had no formal diplomatic contact with the Thylaran species. They possessed no intelligence about Devourer tactics or capabilities. Their weapons technology is considered primitive by galactic standards, and their military doctrine appears to be based on what our analysts can only describe as organized chaos. He paused, looking around at representatives who had spent the previous week debating proper procedures while an entire civilization died. Despite these apparent disadvantages, they successfully drove off a devourer swarm that had already consumed 4 planets. They evacuated survivors, restored critical infrastructure, and are currently leading reconstruction efforts. Total human casualties: 347 killed, 812 wounded. Mission duration: 72 hours. From first contact to enemy retreat, the chamber fell silent. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their specialized seating arrangements. The contrast between human action and coalition deliberation was stark enough to be embarrassing. Council leader Zixana finally broke the silence, her crystalline form reflecting the chamber lights in patterns that indicated she was choosing her words very carefully. Commander Veltar, what is your assessment of these ... Deathworlders? Veltar's patches flickered through a complex sequence of colors, before settling on a pattern that indicated respect mixed with wonder. Perhaps, honored leaders, we have fundamentally misunderstood what it means to be civilized. We have spent so long perfecting the art of avoiding conflict that we forgot why civilization exists in the first place: to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber like a stone thrown into still water. For centuries, the term Deathworlder had been used as an insult, a way to dismiss species that hadn't yet evolved beyond what the galactic community considered primitive behaviors like aggression and emotional decision-making. But as news of the human intervention spread throughout Coalition space, something began to change. The word started appearing in contexts that had nothing to do with insults or dismissal. Rescue services began advertising themselves as Deathworld. Military academies started offering courses in Deathworlder tactics. Parents throughout the galaxy began telling their children bedtime stories about the brave humans who flew across the stars to save strangers. The term Deathworlder would never again carry the sting of insult. Across the vast cosmos, it had become synonymous with something the galaxy desperately needed more of: hope backed by the courage to act when action was needed most. Retrike Laud can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.